Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have with us Anna LeBaron, and co-hosting with me is Renee Steelman of She Became Visible. And Renee, you can introduce your show as well, because we're going to co-brand this collaboration.
Yes, we are. And I appreciate Gene letting me co-host with him today, because when he told me he had Anna LeBaron on, I was like, oh my gosh. I am such a fan of her story and her progress and what she's done. My show, She Became Visible, highlights women and tries to encourage women to stand up and say, I have a purpose, I have worth, I have value, and I want to be seen for being me and not someone's daughter, wife, sister, mother, and try to be as much of an individual as well as serving the community and your family. And you are the perfect example of that, Anna. So I am so thrilled to be here with Gene today.
And we welcome you to our show.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate you having me on, both of you.
That's right. And everybody can look forward to having watch Renee interview Anna with a more in-depth look into her life and how she became more visible herself. So Anna, tell us a little bit more about your, let's say, a 5-minute view of your life in a polygamist family.
Oh my gosh. So my family of origin goes back on my father's side. My family of origin goes back 4 generations to a man named Benjamin F. Johnson, who was the spiritually adopted son of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon religion. And all those on that line of my father's side, going down those 4 generations, makes me a first generation monogamous and a first generation non-Mormon. So on my mother's side, she was part of the LDS church when she was converted into my father's religion. And so my mother had already been married and had 5 children with this man, and they were both converted to my father's fundamentalist Mormon faith. And after they converted, my father had a revelation that gave him my mother as his wife, and he gave my mother's ex-husband 2 other wives as a result. And then my mother had 7 more children with LeBaron, and that's where I came in the picture. I am the 10th of my mother's 12 children. So my father is LeBaron. He became known as the Mormon Manson during the 70s and 80s when he was wanted by the FBI and the Mexican police for the murders of confirmed 28 murders. And some people even count up to 38 people who died as a result of my father's orders because of his belief in the doctrine of blood atonement, which was taught by the founding members of the Mormon faith, Brigham Young and others around him.
And were all the murders based on revelation that he received? Did he say that?
That's what he called it. It was, some of them were more revenge, some were jealousy, some were other things, but he justified it with the doctrine of blood atonement. And that doctrine says, there are some sins that the blood of Christ can't cover. So you have to atone for those sins with the shedding of your own blood. So my father would order hits on people that had committed whatever unpardonable sin he thought they had committed. And they had to be blood atoned in order for them to not go to the hot place, in the afterlife instead of, the cool place, So.
Yeah. And what was it like being a little girl? What were your first memories?
Well, I was 3 years old when my father ordered the first blood atonement on his own brother, Joel. And so life became very stressful for the adults in the group because now crime was being committed. Not that crime wasn't being committed before that, but this is the crime that the government would prosecute. So, we started living life on the run from the law. And it only got worse as time went on. So we lived a life characterized by fear, chaos, and insecurity. We never stayed anywhere very long. Oftentimes we would be up and loaded up into a car and moved to a new place, new state, new everything. Most of the time leaving our belongings behind.
Mm.
And
And you were
so,
taught to be distrustful of outsiders.
oh, we were not allowed to make friends with anyone outside the cult. So that was, fraternizing with the enemy. So we were very isolated, very uneducated. Our education was sparse at best. And some of my siblings being taken out of school in, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, depending on the needs of the cult, because we were basically child slave labor to them.
So tell everyone what year, like you said, you were 3 years old when your family went on the run. What year was that?
1972.
1972. I was just graduating from high school. This is not the 19th century. This is the 20th century. And this is going on. It's hard for people to believe that this goes on in this day and age.
That's right, the jet age.
Yeah, some of your siblings were probably older.
Right.
At the time, how many people were thrown in the car? And
I mean, it just depended on
who was
how
there?
many vehicles. Yeah, it was always something different. Even the people that were in our home or living in our home changed overnight sometimes. People that were there when you went to sleep were not there when you woke up. People had arrived in the middle of the night, because that's usually when they came and left from the homes, because that gave them the cover of darkness. And so there was always too many people living in a home. They would be rented, and the landlord would be told it's two adults and 3 children, when it was really 5 or 6 adults and 20 something children at times.
Right.
So we dumpster dived for food behind the grocery stores, because there was just never enough food to go around. And we dumpster dived or robbed, actually, the Goodwill boxes for clothing and shoes and other things that we needed.
That was just going shopping for you.
Yes, that was. So I live a very different life than now that I did back then.
Well, and you spoke of your education. There was no consistent education.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no, your friends were your family. Your friends were your siblings.
Yes. Yeah. We were very isolated.
Right. And I think where you are at now, I don't know, Jean, how far you wanted to get into it, but tell everybody what you've just accomplished.
Well, I just graduated with a master's degree, and I started a doctoral program in 20 days, like August 24th. I started a doctoral program. So I'm very excited about that.
That is totally amazing. How old were you when you left polygamy?
I ran away from home when I was 13 years old.
So 13, so before high school.
Yes. And it was the year after my dad was found dead in his prison cell, after he was tried and convicted and sentenced to life for ordering the death of Rulon Allred, who was another polygamist rival. And so one of the things that is important to me to say is that I'm here in a better place now because of the healing that I've been through. But I also understand that there are people, especially people probably in your audience, who have been incredibly impacted by the things that my father influenced his followers to do. And I just want to say how incredibly heartbroken I am for the victims. And I was a victim of my father's cult myself. And it's taken a long journey for me to heal and come to the place that I am. But acknowledging the impact of my father's influence and acknowledging the victims is important to me.
That's great.
Right. And so you found a safe place to be. Was it a relative or some other friend of a friend or something like that?
It was my half sister who was already on the fringe, not out. She was married and had 5 kids at the time. She wasn't out because if you got out, that put a target on your back. So they weren't officially out yet.
You had to be careful.
You had to be really careful. And at that time, at age 13, I didn't know any of this was going on, any of the murders, any of that was happening. So I didn't even know that it could put me at risk when I ran away and did what I did. So as it turned out, I wasn't ever at risk because I was never indoctrinated and I didn't know anything about the murders that I could go to the authorities with. So it was mostly people who had information and could go to the authorities that if you got out, you had a target on your back.
Right. If you could testify.
Correct.
Okay. And so what was it like going to, I guess, assume you got enrolled in high school and you didn't have very much of an education prior to that, spotty at best. What was that like?
My sister enrolled me in a little Christian school that was half a mile from her house. She considered that to be the lesser of 2 evils when compared to the public schools, because her children were young and still in elementary school. And now she has a teenager. So, she considered me, coming to believe in Jesus as a savior would be better than learning about drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and possibly having to raise a, unwed teen mother, So,
Right.
and as it turned out, I did come to know Jesus as my savior. And I wouldn't tell them at first because I was afraid that they would be appalled and then send me away. And so it took a long time before I was able to be honest about that with them. And, things worked out. So I ended up graduating from that little private school that was unaccredited, but I did get an education. When I decided I wanted to go back to school, I had to go get a GED to prove that I was educated. So,
I find that interesting that you got your testimony of Jesus Christ from a Christian school, not from the LDS fragment that you belong to, that your
Correct.
father was working under the pretense that he was receiving revelations from God. You didn't get your testimony of Jesus Christ from that upbringing. You had to go to a Christian school.
No, it was the opposite. Our family spoke about Christians with scorn and derision. And, all those Christians, the tone of the voice, it was hard for me to even say the word Jesus for a long time, just because of how subversively indoctrinated we had been against that.
Now, does that come from the teachings that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I don't even know if you even used that term in your fragment, but the Mormon Church was the true church of God on the earth. All other churches were evil and were the whore of the earth. That came from that. So when LDS people today deny that teaching or say we never believed that or we never taught that, this is a perfect example of not only was it taught, it was lived to the extent that it wasn't just my kids can't play with your kids. It's like you can die. It's okay because you're not even valuable in Christ's eyes because
that's right. What was the name of the church that
my father? The church that my father started with his brother was called the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times. Then when they split, my father began his own church called the Church of the Lamb of God.
It's funny, the Lamb of God, but not Jesus.
Yeah, that's funny.
We would say that's the same person, but you were afraid to say Jesus or to think that Jesus was different.
So a lot of people were raised in and have different perspectives on the doctrinal teachings and the way things were couched and how it was presented. So my sister would tell you an entirely different story about that.
Yeah.
And we were very close. She was part of the documentary with me. She's in this book with me. My sister Celia, she has very different ideas, and not ideas, but just her experiences were so different than mine.
That's right.
Interesting. That's the story of siblings.
And I think that that's the story of like every single person listening has their own story, their own ideas about how things progressed and where they're at and perspectives. And you can talk to two people who experienced the same exact thing in the same room, breathing the same air when it happened, and they're going to walk away with two different perspectives.
Yeah.
And you had asked earlier about, like you wanted me to talk about the creative part of my writing my book. That specific thing that I just mentioned about two people experiencing the same thing in the same room can have two different perspectives was one of the things that kept me from writing my book for years and years, because I was very afraid of what my siblings would think if I talked about something that they had a different perspective about.
Yeah.
Because so many people in our family experienced it so differently that I was really like afraid of their criticisms or judgment of how I said it or remembered it or whatever. And I had to overcome that piece just right there in order to gain the courage to go ahead and write my story anyway.
Yeah, you would hear everybody else express their thoughts about things, and you would say, "Oh, that's not my experience."
Correct.
But that kept you from saying what you wanted to say.
Right.
And there was the part of it where I got out at 13 and got enrolled in a little Christian school where I found some safety and a semblance of security that was meaningful to me. And most of my other siblings took a lot longer to get out and find their way to freedom from that cult mentality. It was actually not until 1992 that the whole thing my father started burned itself to the ground. So it was another decade before all of my siblings got out.
Interesting.
And so many of them ended up in what became known as the KOG, or the Kingdom of God is what they referred to themselves as. And they were the ones who were committing some more of the crimes. Even though my father had been long in the grave, they continued the killing spree of, doing the blood atonements that my father had ordered while he was in prison. And so their lives ended up being so much more impacted as victims of my father's cult than I ever was, that the other part that I had to overcome was this idea that because somebody suffered more than me, then I don't have a right to tell my story. Who do I think I am? Who do you think you are? You didn't suffer as much. And that was another piece of the puzzle that I had to kind of work out in my mind before I could tell my story publicly.
Yes, you had to give yourself permission.
Well, because there is a trauma Olympics out there where people will disregard your trauma because it's not the same as their trauma. And my trauma was worse than your trauma.
Right.
And I love what you said about your life experience being denounced because it isn't someone else's life experience. And you hear that all the time in people that have left the Mormon church. That's not true. I never knew a bishop that did that, or I've never known anyone that did that. That's not true. And I think that's not true needs to be eliminated from from all of the dialogue, because it's not your truth, but it's my truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things that I have learned that I believe would be helpful to people is that when you were talking about the trauma Olympics, I think you called it, that's a good analogy. But the other thing is that, let's just use for an example, a near drowning experience is a very traumatic experience. You can have a near drowning in a bathtub, or you can have a near drowning in an ocean, and the experience and the effect of it is the same. Right. So comparing trauma is just such a futile experience. Everybody, even in my own family, people that experienced the same things I did, got through them without the effects of the trauma that affected me. I've been in decades of therapy and, still unpacking some of that pain and the wounds and the suffering that that was inflicted on me, still unpacking some of it.
Right.
Right. So you decided that you were going to give yourself permission to write the book. What did you do then? How did you research what to do, or what happened?
Well, I ended up signing up for a writers' conference. I had been to multiple writers' conferences, but none of them like this one. When I signed up for this one, they promised and said, if you'll engage in our process, by the end, you will have a working title to your book, chapter titles, you'll have a website,
Outline.
you'll have this. And they delivered.
Wow.
And because I said, I can learn. I'm a learner and I'm smart. I can figure this out. If you just tell me what to do, I'll do it. And literally I left that place having written the first, 400 or 500 words of the book. Whereas for the past 10 years, I would sit down at a blank page on the computer screen and just go,
writer's block.
where do I even start?
Wow.
This story is so huge. I don't know where to begin.
Right.
And
Wow.
I would be stuck at, in the beginning, whatever, on the day I was born, like, who wants to read that? Nobody, So
That's excellent. I love that analogy because it's so true. You walk into a room that's been ransacked and you don't know where do I start cleaning up? There's mud, there's water, there's fire, there's theft, there's everything. And you don't know where to start.
Yeah.
But you need someone to say, all right, what we're going to do first is to take out all the trash that's laying on the top of this pile.
Yes.
And that's what you
Step
need.
by step.
So that's so great. I love
And so I now will coach people who want to write books and help them with that process, the getting started and overcoming those mental blocks that are almost always there. And one of the books I'm going to recommend, because I love recommending books, I'm an avid reader, is called not The Art of War. It's the opposite. The War of Art. And I believe the author's name is Stephen Pressfield. And for those who are sensitive, there are some swear words in the book. So just be aware of that going in.
PG-13 warning.
Yes, thank you.
Wow. That's so fascinating. I love that because it also acknowledges that we can't do everything by ourselves, that we need a team. And,
Yes.
you may be so talented in one area, but there's another area that you're lacking skills in. And that's why you have a team.
Yes.
And so you are so verbal, you're so articulate, you've got such a life experience, but how do I put that down on paper? And it's
So
I love that.
I went through a process that I don't even know how to describe it, except to say that I wrote the bones of the book, and my co-writer, Lesley Wilson, you'll find her name on the front cover of the book with mine. She put the flesh and blood on it and made it come to life. Because
how did you meet her?
I was introduced to her by the lady who was my agent at the time that I got that book contract. She knew people who were editors and content editors and, line editors, all that, So she agreed to work with me. And so I would write the bones of the story. And like writing a memoir is a skill that I didn't have because, writing scene and dialogue, all of those things are such an important part of good writing for a memoir style book. So I didn't have that skill. And my agent was like, we don't have time for you to learn this skill. So we're going to connect you with somebody that does.
Yeah.
So the process that I went through with Lesley was I would write what happened. As they say in the writer world, I would tell what happened and she would help me show what happened. So there's a difference in the writing between telling and showing.
Yes.
And so she helped me with that part of it. And that's why I wanted her name on the front cover of the book with mine, because I didn't want anyone thinking that I could replicate that writing style in another, because that wasn't my contribution to the book.
Yeah.
Making it come to life and telling the story in a way that was readable was Lesley Wilson.
Yes. And telling the story is so important. I just listened to another author, and they said they would write things, and their editor would send it back, and they'd go blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So it's like, you need to tell the story. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just, and then I went here and then I went there, and people are like, whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
And there is a talent to that. That is a gifted thing that other people have learned. And then that is, like you say, there's only so much life experience we can have.
Right.
So I love that you shared that. There's so many people out there. Bill Maher just wrote a book, and he very, very openly said, oh, of course I had a team. I had to have a team. He's a busy man.
Mhm.
And so it's so important that you're honest about that.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, the first draft of your story is you telling yourself the story, and it's for your eyes only. You can name names and say what happened. And it's in the second draft or third or fourth where you can change the details and, change names and, make it to where it's for public consumption. Because not every single aspect of my story or every single private thing in my life is in the book, because not everything is for public consumption.
There you go.
But that first draft is, yes, you can say everything and name names and tell what happened,
Right.
because that's you telling yourself the story. And that's your first draft.
Excellent. That
stays under lock and key if details got out and people would be harmed,
Right.
That's
So,
right. And that's a different
password
process.
protected.
And
Right.
lots of people hear about ghostwriters. And I spoke with a ghostwriter once and said, how do you do what is ghostwriting? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And she said it was basically on the phone, talking with the person who's had the story to tell, and asking the right questions and getting all that experience out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then like maybe recording the sessions and then creating chapters and the book that way.
So the process that Lesley and I used was, I would write the story and send it to her. She would call me, and like you just described, she would have a headset on and she would be typing or recording, and she would draw out of me way more detail than I had included. What did the house look like, and what did the chairs look like, or what were you thinking, feeling, sensing, all of those things. What did you see, hear, smell, whatever.
Oh.
She pulled all of that out of me, and then she would rewrite what I wrote and insert all of that new detail in scene and dialogue in a way that was, brought it to life.
Right.
And then I would edit every single chapter along with my sister Celia. We would take whatever she had written and make sure that it was accurate and correct and,
true to your story.
True
Yes.
to my story.
Your
Yes.
voice.
And my voice, and we would change, he didn't say it that way or whatever when she was writing the dialogue. My sister and I literally sat and edited every chapter to make it to where it was the most accurate. Now, we did have to compress some stories and blend some just for brevity, just because nobody wants an 800-page memoir, So some things had to be compressed for brevity. Names were changed to protect both the innocent and the guilty. And so all those things happened in the editing process. And I mean, Lesley Wilson earned the right to have her name on the front cover of the book. Yeah, and I'm proud of that.
About how much time elapsed from the time you took the course to the time the book was out with your name on it as an author?
I took the course in January of 2014, and the book was published in March of 2017.
Wow. Okay.
So, but our very last edit was on Christmas Day of 2016. So all of 2014, 15, and 16. So a full 3 years.
Another example of things not being able to be done in 60 days.
Correct.
It's like, there's so many programs out there. In 12 weeks, we're going to get you blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not possible. Nothing is done in 12 weeks.
Well,
and
I've met
lots of authors, either at Sunstone or just on Facebook or whatever, who said it took 10 years to write a book that they were writing.
Yeah. I mean, you can write a first draft, and people can help you get that part done.
Yeah.
But if you're going to traditionally publish the way I did, just from the time you get an agent, it takes probably a year to find a publisher and then another year or two for the book to be published. So there's just not a fast way to be traditionally published.
Right.
A lot of people self-publish today, and it's possible to self-publish. For anybody that's going to go that route, I highly recommend that you find a professional editor and a professional book cover designer.
Yes.
Because your book cover will sell books, and if you have good editing, other people will sell your books because they're readable.
Yeah, word of mouth.
But if your book cover is, designed by somebody on Fiverr, not that those people aren't very hardworking and good at what they do, if you don't pay good money for the book cover design and you don't pay good money for editing, chances of your book, going places and being recommended and passed around are slim.
Right.
That's right.
So if you have money to spend, do that. Do those two things.
Can't judge the content of the book by the cover, but people will judge the cover.
Yes. Yes. And, books that aren't edited well are just hard to read.
Right.
For just practical purposes. So you can tell that I'm a coach and a teacher just because I can't help myself. I'm just going to let me just help you.
People like you, because there is this misguided idea when you walk into Deseret Book and you see books by all of the apostles and all of the people that are in presidencies, and you think, wow, that lady's amazing. I mean, she's the General Relief Society president, and she wrote a book, and she's got 7 kids, and she homeschools them, and it makes you feel like trash. And then
bread's in the oven.
She did not do that. She did not do that. Obama did not write his own book, and all these people, they did not write their own books. He's the president of the United States.
It's a team.
You did not write your own book. You should have been handling international affairs. It's a team. And I'm so grateful that you're acknowledging that.
I tell everyone, every writer needs an editor, period.
Yes.
Even if you have a master's degree in English and you're going to write, please get yourself an editor.
Yeah. I just a short little story here. My mom wrote a tiny little Christmas book. She made these little Christmas stockings, and she wanted to include this book. And she gave me the book, and I said, Mom, you're going to have to edit this. It's just too long. And she said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There you go.
That's funny.
It's sitting in her drawer. It's just, it's too long, and you can't see it. You need outside eyes to see these things where you go, I don't care about that story. You go, but I love that story. It's like, well,
a whole chapter of my book was removed by the publisher. Like,
yeah, how dare you?
So take it personally.
Exactly. I tried not to, and I've since gotten over it. So it's been a lot of years.
So the book comes out. Your name's on the cover. You go, wow, I did it. Mm-hmm. And then what happens? Are there any do you watch the charts of the book moving up in sales, or did you?
I probably watched the Amazon charts because those are the only ones that authors have access to. That if you're not the publisher. So I watched those for probably a year and a half just for the fun of it. But because I was an unknown person, I wasn't like a celebrity, it was just like I was an unknown person. It's hard for a first-time author to gain traction.
Right.
Like
and
that.
To make a splash.
To make a big splash. But because I had marketing experience and I absolutely loved social media, loved social media at the time. So I combined my marketing experience, my love of social media, and my understanding of how algorithms work and all of that to not just launch my book and make it do well its first year, but I started a business helping other authors launch their books that from 2015 to 2020, when the pandemic changed everything for me, for a lot of people, I should say, I earned my living helping authors and publishers put books out on the market and get the traction they needed. And many of them became New York Times bestsellers, USA Today bestsellers, Wall Street Journal, all the lists that are out there. USA Today, I think I mentioned that one. But lots of books on the list because of the marketing experience I had and and just pure unadulterated love of Facebook and social media in general.
So that's how, in a way, how I got my channel going and started. I call it, I brute forced my way up to 900 subscribers so far. So that's not too bad.
I'm going to say, Jean, Anna, these are two people that did not pull up the ladder. They did not say, I've reached success. I don't want anyone else to compete with me. I will pull up the ladder so that no one else will be there. You've both thrown down the ladder. Not only have you both done that, but you even set up like a ladder against the ladder to help people get on that first rung so they too can see success. And you don't do that very much.
One of the books I helped launch was my cousin, Ruth Warner, who was Joel LeBaron's daughter. She was a nursing infant. She was 3 months old when my dad had her father killed. She wrote her memoir called The Sound of Gravel. And when I launched that one with her, helped her do that, it became an instant New York Times bestseller. That's one of the ones that I'm the most proud of, just because I felt like I was doing reparations.
Yes.
In that moment.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Making good for your fathers or grandfathers, whatever, past deeds, fathers' past deeds.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not responsible for what my father did, and cognitively that makes so much sense, that nobody is holding me accountable for that. But at the same time, you can't help but carry the weight of it and what that means and what it meant in the world, what my father did. So
on that note, and I think you mentioned this in your documentary, tell me if you did, someone asked you, why don't you change your name?
Mm-hmm.
And is that true? And did I hear that from somebody else? I said, why don't you change your name? And you're like, why?
It was my sister Celia, I think you're remembering.
Okay.
She was hiding behind her ex-husband's last name for years. She wouldn't go back to her maiden name after she divorced because she didn't want to be known as a LeBaron, because, you know, being known as a LeBaron, there was so much negative connotation, especially when you were Ervil LeBaron's child.
Right.
But as part of the documentary and talking about what happened to us, and part of the reason we wanted to do the documentary is because we decided that Ervil LeBaron, our father, doesn't get the last word on what it means to be a LeBaron. Like, we can also go out there and create the kind of world that we want to live in and that we want our children to live in, with love and joy and kindness and goodness out there.
Beautiful.
And that's what we're all about now. All of my father's children, that's what we're about now.
I love
it's beautiful
that people will relate the goodness that you've done with that name.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
That's what I hope. That's what I want to do with the doctoral program that I'm entering in, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that and how things are for you right now. How do you view life? What's your philosophy?
I have, I raised 5 children, and now I have a grandchild that's 5, a granddaughter that's 5, and they have a son that's due at the end of this month. So any day now I'll have my second grandchild. When I became an empty nester and when the pandemic was happening, I decided to go back to school, and I earned a master's degree in Christian spiritual formation and leadership. And now I will begin this month a doctoral program called a Doctor of Ministry in Formation and Soul Care. And that formation part in soul care is the intersection at which I want to write my next book. And I want to serve the population of people who have experienced religious trauma or spiritual abuse of any kind, and who also want to keep their faith or spirituality intact in a healthy way that's life-giving to them. And that's the intersection at which I will be studying and working and wanting to go forward from here into the next season of my life.
That's beautiful.
Sounds like I have another episode to do with you in a few years or something.
Yes, let's just mark it on the calendar. I graduate it's going to be May of 2028. Wow. So, and they're gonna make me write a dissertation. So that's going to be about.
I love that, because I've heard so many people say 3 years or 4 years is going to go by, whether you start this project or not.
Mhm.
And I love that you're not looking at it like, 2028. It's like,
Mm-mm.
let me tell you when I'm going to graduate from this
Yeah.
program that I'm starting next week. I love
Yeah.
that. That's the attitude.
So
That's what
I
got you in the house at 30.
will be 59 years old when I graduate with my doctorate.
Oh,
And I am saying I will be entering the last third of my life. I will have 30 more years in
yes.
which to do good in the world and put kindness and love and joy out in the world and create a space where people who want to have a faith that's life-giving can thrive and help with that. So my life is not even, I'm not even talking about that yet. I have 30 more good years left.
Yes.
That's right. You're out of the cult and it's time to live.
Yes, 100% yes.
Yeah.
I'm here for that.
That's great. So thanks a lot, Anna, for coming on our show. I can't wait for your episode on Renee's show, in a month or two, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe she'll have to come on before you start your program.
Well,
Maybe it'll be
well,
And
the
so-
sooner we do it, the better. Because once that grandbaby arrive and I start the doctoral
your
program,
doctoral program, absolutely.
so
Yep.
let's get that calendared.
Let's do it. Yep.
That's right. And I have to thank my wife because she's the one that got your audiobook a few years back and was just amazed at your story.
Yeah.
And when I saw your the documentary come out and saw you on that, and my wife said, "Hey, that was the book I was reading last year." Right. And so anyhow,
your wings, Jean.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks to my wife. Thanks to you. Thanks to Renee. Everybody share, like, and subscribe because that's part of the marketing algorithm for
That's exactly
YouTube.
how it works.
And if you like what we're doing, think about donating, or we have a tip jar in our description. Thanks everyone again, and have a great summer.
Well,
Bye-bye.
can I say one more thing about that
yes.
tip jar?
Uh-huh.
If you are somebody who gives to tip jars like this to online creators, you can call yourself a patron of the arts.
That's right.
It's not just donate, $6 billion to create a ballet conservatory, or I don't even know that language. It's not part of my world. But
that's right. Michelangelo.
Yeah,
and
you can call
all those artists had patrons.
Yep.
Go donate and put that on your byline. I am a patron of the arts.
There you go. Thanks a lot again. Bye-bye.
Bye.